Hello, everybody. This is Wet Toast here from Team Chemical Toast, and today I'll be reading I'd say a very strange fiction per se. It's the Sweet Apple Massacre fan fiction, and it's right about the My Little Pony stuff. And as funny and as stupid as this fan fiction is, it is very wrong. So, warning to those who are easily offended by sexual things like of this nature. Please get off the video. So, without further ado, it's Sweet Apple Massacre. Big Macintosh surveyed the many apple trees that made up Sweet Apple Acres. It was nearby apple buck season once again, and it looked as though they would have been having a bumper harvest this year. He nodded, satisfied. His sister Applejack walked up beside him. Woo! Boy, howdy. I'm sure glad you ain't injured this time, Big Macintosh, she said. Why, there's even more apples on them trees than last year. Yep, Big Macintosh replied in his characteristic manner. Them's a lot of apples. Applejack was silent for a moment, enjoying the feel of the slight breeze against her blonde mane. Say, I don't suppose you've seen Apple Bloom anywhere, have you? I've been looking for her all day, and she ain't nowhere to be found. Big Macintosh shook his head. Sorry, sis, can't say I have. Darn, that silly filly's probably gone off somewhere with her friends. I just hope she ain't getting herself in any mischief, or else, well, there'll have to be pay. Don't you worry about yourself, Applejack, he replied. I'm sure she's perfectly fine, but anyway, I need to go back to the barn. I gotta go and press some apples for some of my home-brewed apple cider. I hoof-picked a few apples earlier, especially, all nice and plump and ripe, and they ain't gonna press themselves. Applejack laughed. You sure do love your cider, don't you? Just make sure Apple Bloom don't get her hooves on it again. We all know what happened last time. Big Macintosh chuckled along with his sister. Yep. The large red pony trotted back to the barn and gently closed the door. He opened the trap door with his mouth and went down the steps into an old disguised apple cellar. Usually it was just filled with junk, scrap metal, old worn-out plows, old rope, and various other bites and blobs that had outlived their usefulness. Big Macintosh often came down here when he wanted to get away from the world, to withdraw for a little while for some peace and quiet. Today it was different, however. The old rope, at least, had found a new use, because in cellar space were Apple Bloom and her fellow cutie mark crusaders, Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo, bound and gagged, propped up against the wall. The three pairs' scared round eyes looked up at Big Macintosh as he approached. Now then, you three fillies, he said, as placid as ever, y'all need to learn a lesson. You need to learn not to mess around with Big Macintosh. All I want is some peace and quiet, he said, looking directly at Apple Bloom. The little red hairy filly cowered under his gaze. All I want is a quiet life, without all you cutie mark crusaders running around the place, making the noise. I am finished with y'all. There ain't gonna be no noise from you ever again. As Big Macintosh approached, Scootaloo flapped her wings, struggling to get off the ground. Big Macintosh laughed and grabbed on one of her wings. He twisted at first, slow, watching the pain visibly grow in her eyes, but then tore hard, smiling slightly when he heard the snap and muffled whimper that came from Scootaloo. He then threw her to the ground. Your wings are useless, you silly filly, he said pleasantly. He then went to a toolbox and took out a rusty knife with a jagged blade and dropped it in front of the three fillies. I'm gonna take off those gags now, he said. The first one of you to scream gets their tongues cut out. He took Sweetie Belle's gag first. She looked at him with terror, but managed to stay quiet. Next was Scootaloo. She let out a strangled whine and was breathing heavily, still in horrendous pain from her broken wing, but managed to resist the temptation. Finally, he removed the gag from his sister Apple Bloom. She stared at him with her large round eyes, filled with fear and incomprehension. This was Big Macintosh, after all, her big brother and the gentlest of souls, wasn't he? Surely he was just a horrible joke. But she had seen what he had done to Scootaloo's wing, and it was definitely no joke. She took a deep breath. Applejack! Big Macintosh shoved himself in Apple Bloom's mouth, silencing her scream. He sighed and shook his head. I told you not to scream, Apple Bloom. You should listen to your big brother. I'll scream, and scream again, and Applejack will hear, and Apple Bloom said flatteringly. You know, I kind of hope you do. After all, I still ain't forgiven Applejack for that injury she gave me last apple buck season. If you want Applejack to join y'all down here, well, I suggest you scream away. I, for one, would welcome her company. But now, to business. Big Macintosh picked up the knife and loomed over the cowering Apple Bloom. He pinned her down with a powerful hoof and stuck the knife into Apple Bloom's mouth. Sweetie Belle vomited at the sight, the thick yellow chunks and acidic-smelling liquid splattering heavily on the floor. Scootaloo managed to not be sick, but rather gasp and with some effort cut onto her tongue. Apple Bloom tried to scream, but her mouth was too full of blood, so it was just more of a muted gargle. After a short while, she collapsed, tears screaming in from her eyes, falling unconscious from the shock and the pain. Big Macintosh then took the tongue and rolled it into the puddle of putrid vomit on the floor. He smiled at Scootaloo. "You hungry?" Scootaloo shook her head vigorously and cast him on a deafening glare. "If Rainbow Dash was here, she would kick the crap out of you, you maniac." Big Macintosh shrugged. "Well, she ain't. Anyway, I would be so sure about that. Rainbow Dash ain't as tough as she likes to make out." He shoved the vomit-covered tongue into Scootaloo's mouth and used his hoof to clamp her mouth shut. "Don't you tongue go trying to spit it out now," he said calmly, with a little laugh, and the filly struggled and squirmed. "Don't your mother ever tell you about how important it is to chew your food?" Scootaloo closed her eyes and flapped her one good wing desperately, eventually swallowing Apple Bloom's tongue. Big Macintosh still holding the writing Scootaloo down with his strong hooves, then mounted the orange filly and slid his penis into her tight virgin pussy, raping her for several minutes while Sweetie Belle watched, trembling with revulsion. Apple Bloom was still out cold, blood pouring from her torn-up mouth. "The Cutie Mark Crusaders rape victims," Big Macintosh said with tender mockery as he fucked Scootaloo, following by a gentle chuckle. "Guess y'all found your purpose in life. Now you special talent is getting raped." "Yep." Eventually he withdrew from Scootaloo and gripped her head tight and repeatedly punched her hard with a hoof in the face, causing her nose to shatter and spurt with blood. He scooped up some blood and some of the Sweetie Belle's vomit with his tongue and held it in his mouth, so that it mixed with his saliva and brought his mouth closed to Scootaloo's and spat the rank mixture into her mouth. He clamped his hoof over her mouth and held her nose until she gagged and eventually had no choice but to swallow. Okay, guys, so that is part 1 of Sweet Apple Massacre. Part 2 will be out next Sunday night or Monday morning. Be sure to stay tuned to the channel on Team Chemical Toast. Peace out until then. This has been Wet Bread.